Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for your patience. It is an absolute pleasure to see you all today. I'm very excited to be here on the UK panel, and to kick things off, I'd like to introduce someone very special from the UK government, His Majesty's Trade Commissioner for Europe, Barton, who will now join us and give a few words on UK sustainable futures and also infrastructure and also all the amazing innovation that is happening in the UK. Chris.
Thank you so much, and what a total pleasure to be here. My name is Chris Barton. I'm His Majesty's Trade Commissioner for Europe, and it's my job and my delight to encourage a thriving UK-Europe trade relationship. I want to share with you today, if I may, two things. One is to talk a little bit about our overall approach to sustainability and driving the low-carbon transition that we all need, and to share what we have found has been helpful. And then secondly, I want to talk a little bit specifically about graphene, which is the main focus of our panel today, because it's really important in itself. It's also, I think, a wonderful case study of some of the things that we can do together in order to deliver what we need. So let me start with our overall approach to low carbon. And the first thing to say is there is a very strong, deep commitment within the UK system to that low carbon transition. And I know that is shared among many countries across the world, which is hugely welcome and particularly pertinent at the moment as we have COP27 and G20 meetings progressing. So that commitment is partly deeply held, but it's also more than that. We've taken legal provisions to ensure that there is an obligation on the UK to make that transition, so by 2050 to be fully net zero. And very encouragingly, there is a strong, broad political consensus in the UK towards making that transition. And to us, that's the sort of first step, really, in ensuring that governments are doing what they can, is to make that really firm, clear commitment to the low-carbon transition, which is what we have done. The second bit, which I think is equally important, is to follow that up with specific plans and actions and activities across the different elements of the economy which need to make that transition. So, for example, on the electricity side, we've had very ambitious targets to drive a major increase in the deployment of renewable electricity from an offshore wind in particular. So we were about just over 10 years ago about 1 gigawatt of offshore wind, now about 10 gigawatts, aiming to be 30 gigawatts by the end of this decade, ambitions to be even more. Nuclear, carbon capture, use and storage, smart grid. In all these areas, having specific targets and plans to make sure that we can deliver. We do the same not just in electricity, in heat, in transport, in the way we do business, in the way we do agriculture. In all these areas, having specific roadmaps and plans to turn the overall ideal of making that transition to zero carbon by 2050 into concrete reality as we transform the whole of our economy. So we have the overall commitment, we have the specific plans, and then thirdly, and I think particularly important in this sort of environment, is to emphasize that we see trade and investment and openness to trade and investment as being fundamental to making that transition. We're clear that we won't be able to make those changes that we want without a lot of investment and a lot of ideas, a lot of cooperation, a lot of partnership with the likes of yourselves and with other countries, businesses, governments from across the world. So we're very much look to have an open economy where we welcome international investment, we welcome international trade, we see trade and investment as an essential part of making that transition. So those are just three bits I wanted to share in terms of our overall approach to low carbon, which we think is key. Clear overall commitment, concrete plans, and then an openness to international trade and investment. Let me then turn second to the specific case of graphene. And that is what a lot of today is going to be focusing on, the wonder material, as it is sometimes described. And I'm very quickly going to share 5 I's that we have that we think are important for graphene, why we think we made progress in the UK on graphene, and I think these are also applicable in other areas of innovation. The first is ideas. So someone has got to come up with the ideas, and it was at the University of Manchester in 2004 that the properties of the wonder material graphene were first isolated. I'm told during a Friday night sort of experiment club which they had in the University of Manchester. It was a session led by Professor Andrea and Professor Kostya Novoselov, and Professor Novoselov, I believe, is here somewhere in the building, and they subsequently got a Nobel Prize for Physics for that groundbreaking research. And as so often, having ideas is the beginning. But you then need to follow up the ideas with the second I, which is investment, providing the finance and the money to support that. And again, the government in the UK contributed about £300 million of research money into developing those ideas. And I think that is, again, a common feature across new areas of technology. So ideas, investment. Third is institutions. Having the institutions to really deliver and run this. So, for example, with that 300 million, we have what our Henry Royce Institute, which is a partnership of 9 different institutions, which helped to ensure that the funding was delivered in the best way to the best sources. And we have institutions specifically on graphene in the UK, the National Graphene Institute, which can coordinate and organize and structure our approach. So we think ideas, investment, institutions. Fourthly, innovation. Of course, whatever ideas come, they need to be developed, they need to be strengthened, they need to be taken in new directions. And as the home of graphene, the University of Manchester in England also hosts the Graphene Engineering Innovation Centre, which is pronounced geek. I'm not sure that's the most flattering pronunciation, but it is really important to have that innovation centre, which sits between academia and industry and government, to make sure the 3 of us together are collaborating to develop. So ideas, investment, institution, innovation, and finally is infrastructure. And the infrastructure in the UK includes the Innovate UK funded catapults. These are places and institutions which can help the development and acceleration of ideas. And we've been using, they offer the opportunity for industry to apply advanced materials such as graphene through test bedding of process formation to breakthrough products, processes, services, technologies, i.e. to put it into practice. So those are 5 I's I'd like to share with you. I think they're relevant for graphene, and they're relevant more generally. Final thing is to tell you that I've told you a lie. I said I only had 5 I's. I've got one more I, and the most important I of all. And the most important I of all is individuals. And what we have here on the panel today is some individuals who are deeply expert in these areas, who are going to share their experience, their insights, their intelligence. So it's a great pleasure for me to allow the panel of people who really know what they're talking about to come onto the stage and share the insights they've got. But thank you very much. It's been a great pleasure to speak to you, and I look forward to us all working together to make these transformations in an open and collaborative way. Thank you very much indeed.
Right, so here we are. I'm really, particularly excited about this panel because every single one of these people I'm going to invite on stage, I have a special connection to. So the first person I'd like to introduce is my former professor during my PhD, Professor Vladimir Falko. So he's the director of the National Graphene Institute. And it's wild to me that we're sharing the same stage today, so thank you for coming. Please, wherever you'd like. The second person I'd like to invite today is Professor Andrea Ferrari. He's from the University of Cambridge and the director of the Cambridge Graphene Centre. What Andrea doesn't know is I've always well respected his work, and when people ask me, have I ever spoken to Andrea? I always say, no, I haven't. I'm not sure he knows who I am. And to have you here today is a great honor. Thank you for flying here today. Next, I'd like to introduce the CEO of Versarien, Neill Ricketts. Versarien is the first graphene company I've known of. During my PhD, I did graphene. I only wanted to do academic, but when I learned about what Versarien were doing, I wanted actually to go into industry. And the last panelist is my good friend, Nicole Morgan. We went to the same university, and now she's a junior associate at McKinsey. I'm super proud of her, and I'm really happy that she's completing this panel. Right, ooh. Right, so we're all here today. We're going to talk about building a sustainable future with graphene. Now, what does sustainable future even mean? Everyone talks about sustainability, green. What does it mean? Is it about energy? Is it just jargon so that people can get more investment? I'd first like to ask the first question to Nicole about what she thinks a sustainable future means, and what does she think graphene has to do with it?
So, I think it's an excellent question, Bonnie. In the current climate crisis that we're in, materials such as plastic, glass, batteries, cement, they form 20% of global CO2 emissions. And if we're to achieve net zero and successfully execute the energy transition, materials play a huge role in this. And I think it's innovations such as graphene that we need to take from lab to commercialization, which I'm sure my colleagues here are going to be able to speak to plentifully. I think it's an essential piece of the puzzle, if you will. Otherwise, it's just not going to be feasible.
I like the point you made about from lab to market. I'd like to go to Vladimir. What is the University of Manchester doing? So you're at the National Graphene Institute. Isn't that all research, or is there more?
Graphene offers amazing opportunity because by a small addition of the substance, you can change, improve, and give new properties to materials which are already being used in industry. And this is a quick gain for many companies to implement in their manufacturing processes, for example, with a number of products which are already on the market thanks to the shortcut from research into innovation. For example, this shoe that you can see here is a result of research which has been done only a couple of years ago, and it's already sold in the shops in Manchester. The other example of what graphene can do is, by changing the properties and manufacturability, is when you add it to concrete, you can actually make concrete much better. You can make it denser, you can make it waterproof, and also you can provide long-term energy saving by making it better and making it more efficient. And this is an example of what maybe Nicole will mention later in terms of how it works in terms of sustainability. Also, what one can do with graphene, and this is what we did in many hackathons, well, in 2 hackathons, one of which basically organized by Bonnie as a first trial. People come together and discuss how you can use printed circuits using graphene for a practical application, just to make an idea about a startup. And this is all doable in small companies. This is all doable also in a big scale. It can be easily upscaled to mass production. And it gives interesting opportunities in very broad range of applications, from heat management films for high-performance LCD, which is the top end of the market, to wearables, to printing electronics onto a tissue, onto paper, making barriers for protecting the other materials Even 3D printing is possible nowadays. And of course, a very important element is to make membranes for desalination and for water purification. So that's what it gives a chance to do. And when we work in Manchester, we're trying to shortcut from the high-end research that we pursue in National Graphene Institute into businesses. And for that, we have set up the special unit, the Graphene Innovation Engineering Center, where Versarien is one of the partners as well. And this is a way how you can quickly deliver the knowledge and new technologies to businesses that want to implement it.
Thank you, Vladimir. Vladimir mentioned something really exciting there. So during my PhD, I was dead set on becoming just like Vladimir in several years' time. I'd wanted to become a professor. But at the university, I had the opportunity to work with Versarien Inks in a graphene hackathon where Nicole and I met. So I want to now turn the conversation to Neill and ask him about what are you doing? Because I always hear, oh, graphene's such a scam. There's so much hype. Oh, like it's not, you know, when I think about the innovation cycle of silicon, that was many, many, many years before it went from lab to market. So for me, I think graphene's cycle is quite quick. But Versarien is an example of a company that is and is demonstrating continuously that they're innovating and bringing things to market that people can use. Would you like to tell us more about what Versarien are now working on?
So the big thing for us, we work obviously at the Graphene Innovation Center. The concrete that you saw being poured there contained our product. We poured over 1,000 tons of concrete this year alone. We also work, and the material was developed from a process that Andrea developed in his group as well. And we supplied the ink for your hackathon, so there is a connection between all of us anyway. What we're really interested in now is the scale-up of these materials. There's something like 25 million tons of concrete poured in the UK alone, 200 million tons of concrete in Europe. If we can make a big dent into that, we can reduce the amount of CO2. This isn't about making money and about, you know, the challenge is much bigger than that. It's about saving the society we work in. You only need to look around you to see that this whole building is constructed from concrete. Those 200 million tons of concrete, if you scale that up across the world, it accounts for about 10% of the global emissions in CO2. Using graphene that was developed at Manchester and at Cambridge, we can take somewhere in the region of 25% of that concrete out straight away without any optimization. We're already seeing that. So graphene has come a long way from being a very interesting science experiment to being something that people can use on a day-to-day basis. The thing is once you start using it on a day-to-day basis, it's no longer that sexy because it's something that you just use and you forget about. And so graphene is making that transition into something that's used on a day-to-day basis. These shoes are graphene enhanced. We can make grippier, longer lasting shoes. And if you want the opportunity to win a pair, come along to the UK reception over there and we'll show you some 3D printing concrete being poured or created in real time. We're going to do that at about 5 o'clock on the stage.
Wow, thank you, Neill. So I liked your point there about, you know, we're doing something on a really large scale that people can see, but then it becomes really unsexy. I want to kind of have a juxtaposition to that and ask, Andrea, what is sexy in your field right now? What is it in graphene that's sexy? Because a lot of people are talking about composites and, you know, people are like, oh, but that's low barrier to entry. What are you working on right now that's cutting edge, whether that's electronics or energy storage? You let me know what you think.
Yeah, I think, you know, sexy is nice, but concrete is better because it's here. And what I want to say is that we are all, you know, up in arms against private jets and, oh, these people are using private jets, they're polluting the environment, you know, put them away or whatever. Let's glue ourselves in front of the airports to avoid global pollution. But I mean, global pollution from airplanes accounts for barely 4% of the global emission. You guys, you are all there with your mobile phones, you go home, you watch your Netflix movies, and you think, okay, I'm watching a movie on Netflix, I'm doing good for the environment, I'm not taking the car, I'm staying at home. But data doesn't come for free. Every bit that you see, it's consuming energy, and it's consuming a lot of energy, to the point that during the lockdown, the pollution or the contribution to global emission from airplanes was dwarfed by the contribution from data communication. A Zoom call of 1 hour can produce 300 grams of CO2.
Oh.
One email with a big attachment is 50 grams of CO2. So the great thing about graphene, and the great thing about the so-called massless Dirac fermion, the thing for which Andrea Kostia won the Nobel Prize. They didn't win a Nobel Prize for the Scotch tape. No, you don't give Nobel Prize for Scotch tapes. They won it for physics. So the physics of graphene really enables to transmit and modulate data much more efficiently of what is done at the moment. So the current technology, they consume energy when they transmit the 1, when they transmit the 0, and when they go from 0 to 1. With graphene, you consume no energy in 1, no energy in 0. You only consume during the transition. So you are able to create the future of communication with much lower data, much less energy consumption, and much more efficient. By 2040, it is estimated almost 20% of the global emission will come from datacom. Not to speak about abominations like bitcoins, where to mine a bitcoin use the same energy as an average American family and a stressed American uses for 2 years. I mean, that's just, it should be banned, okay? This wastage of energy. So the future of industry is the so-called Industry 5.0, where not only everything is connected, but artificial intelligence is intimately part of how everything works. And that consumes and requires a lot of data, and that will require much lower consumption of energy when the data are transmitted. So the most exciting thing at the moment is the fact that graphene already now, as we speak today, is a much more efficient material to transmit our data. There is nothing that can work like that. It's due to the physics, the very physics that was the reason for the Nobel Prize. And we can already make devices that are going to change our future, especially when it comes to what is next after the 5Gs, the so-called 6G, which is another 1,000 times increase in datacom. So this is very exciting. The second thing that is also very exciting is the so-called second quantum revolution. So the quantum technologies that are coming, maybe later on, these are also technologies that will allow to do more with less, with much less, and they are much more at the cutting edge is what is needed. And again, the 2D materials, the layered materials, not just graphene, are ideal to create individual ingredients that are used for communication of quantum data. And that has huge implications, not just for technology itself, but also for security. And then, of course, also for the third point I want to make, given also the introduction, not just in Europe, but in the UK, we need to start learning how to make things again. We need what is called the technological sovereignty, which is not a bad word because, in Italy it's a bad word, but in general it means that we cannot always think there's somebody somewhere else that makes our quantum communication devices, our 6G communication devices, and we have no idea. We need to make the things here, and in the UK there is the debate on the UK semiconductor strategy that has not been published yet or is being discussed. In Europe there is the ChipSat, over 40 billion euros already dedicated to this. It's a great opportunity to start making again in Europe and in the UK those technologies that we absolutely need for our future and for our security.
Thank you, Andrea. I'm really captivated by how you have brought many pieces of the Puzzle X 2022 tracks together. You've mentioned quantum computing, the Semiconductor Chips Act. We've talked about energy. You've even mentioned 5G, 6G, future G. So it almost seems that graphene can be a link, not only in the infrastructure industry, but in the future of that, it could take part in many different industries. Now, Nicole here did a panel on quantum earlier, whether is it a hype or is it not? I'd like to throw in a twister question here. What do you think the connection between graphene and quantum is, and whether both of these things are being hyped up, or whether, what's your insight? Where do you see the future for these two things connecting?
So, in all honesty, I don't know, but I think that's the exciting thing with these frontier technologies. I mean, when I first discovered and heard about graphene, there's no way I would have guessed that cement would be one of the most successful use cases or applications for it. So I think, again, it's just this acceleration and bridging the gap between frontier research and the industry that have the problems and the scientists that have these solutions to accelerate this. Currently, I think it's an average of 16 years for the lab to market time, because prediction, I don't have a magic globe unlike anyone else, but I think, we achieve really brilliant things when you can, put the right people together and solve these problems.
I like how you ended that. We can achieve brilliant things when we bring together people from different industries and backgrounds, from startups, entrepreneurship, professorships, academia, industry, consultancies together to really think about and have this dialogue, which would have never happened if we weren't all here today. I'd like to go to you, Vladimir, you've talked a lot about what Manchester, what Geek, what the Graphene Institute are doing currently. It's very practical. Where do you see that trajectory, not only in the next few years, in the near term, but further than that? Would you like to give your insights on what your thoughts are?
Actually, the word graphene is extinct in terms of the future, because there are many other materials which have similar properties of being stable in the form of atomically thin layers. And they can be brought together to create new functionalities and to pack several functionalities within just few nanometers thickness. So instead of the implementation of materials in the composites and reaching some low-hanging fruits, the future is about a dream. And the dream that we actually nurture at Manchester in collaboration between National Graphene Institute and Harry Royce Institute, which is spanned across the UK, is to design impossible materials, materials that you would not be able to synthesize, that you can only build by bringing the pre-prepared planes which have their atomically plane stability. And this looks like a science fiction, but for this science fiction, we already have a tool in Manchester which has been designed by this collaboration between Henry Royce Institute and National Graphene Institute. So the machine it has ultra-high vacuum inside it, so we can work with materials that may not even survive in the presence of oxygen. And we can build layer by layer with heavily controlled orientation of atomic planes into multi-layer structures that cannot be synthesized, that can only be brought together by this assembly. And what you see here is a machine that doesn't use any glue like in the old times. It's not a Scotch tape. It is all controlled by computer. It happens in ultra-high vacuum. And the product of this can actually be scaled up, so the machine can make dozens, hundreds of deposits where you have multi-layers with prescribed sequence of atomic planes built together. Of course, this looks very promising, and this looks like we can make many devices on a single chip, but reality is very ugly. The reality is that the pieces of substances that we exfoliate from the bulk crystals and place them in the prescribed order in the desired sequence, they have random shapes. They would be randomly positioned on a chip. We can have hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of them manufactured, but we need the help from another society, and this is what makes me excited about Puzzle X, which brings materials together with artificial intelligence. Because without the help of computers, without the artificial intelligence software, without the machine learning, we can't do that. We need the community on the robotics side and the IT side to help us in materials to start building the structures, building materials, building devices in an absolutely new way. And this is the possibility to replace the old top-down technology in semiconductors by something very, very different. And as something very different, we can steal the business from China and the United States back into Europe. And this is the foresight that I want to offer. And anyone wants to invest, please come to us.
Thank you, Vladimir. I really enjoyed how you mentioned, bringing together not only the material side, but all the other aspects, such as the digital side. And I think that's what's so symbiotic about being at PuzzleX here today, not only within this auditorium, but within and co-located with Smart City Expo. And Zena, who created PuzzleX, had intentionally created PuzzleX in this way because of this relationship, is that all these incredible things that are happening, these innovations in companies, and all the things that are happening in the lab, they're not isolated. It's that we're doing all these things with the intention that one day they're going to be implemented in the cities of the future that we're going to live in, whether this is through semiconductors, concrete, everywhere we walk, our phones, every time we use Zoom. So I think it's really beautiful that we're here today. So for the last couple of minutes, I'd like to go one by one for some last words and thoughts about what you want the audience to take away from our conversation today.
Well, I think one of the biggest sources of magic is the story Zena, creator of PuzzleX, tells best, which is the story of materials and how we often underestimate their role in daily life. And I think, especially when we bring that into sustainability and some of the things we've discussed here today, I think innovation within materials and really leveraging that is going to play a huge role in the next couple of decades as we really need to take action.
Neill?
I think we've lived through some really traumatic times the last few years, but what that's enabled us to do is to reevaluate, and I see these new materials as being an enabler for not continuing to do the things that we've done in the past, to really look at some of these big challenges that we're going to see. We were talking about food earlier, we were talking about quantum computing, the requirement for data that Andrea was talking about. Well, these materials are the enabler for that. We're going to go through a massive transition over the next decade where things will not be the same as what they are now. And it's those materials that will enable that.
And we don't want everything to stay the same either. So, Andrea?
So if you think about it, it took about 130 years to go from the identification of silicon as a material to the silicon transistor. So now it's only been 20 with graphene, but typically new technologies take between 20 to 40 years to go into the lab. The next 20 years, starting from now, are the exciting years for graphene technology. The next year, we will see the company first bringing these products to the market. We will see mergers and acquisitions. We will see some companies going belly up, other ones exploding in terms of markets. So it's an extremely exciting time to actually make things. And we don't have to look down on people who make things. Making things can be more difficult, especially when it comes to the devices that we use every day, than doing some quick experiment in the lab. We have to have a great respect for this, and this is what is going to happen in the next few years, so lots of excitement. I also want to advertise that in the next 2 or 3 weeks, thanks to the Emirati Space Agency, but also in collaboration with MIT, ULB, and others, we're going to launch a rover on the moon that is going to go to the moon, and this rover will have some wheels coated with some graphene composites in order to study the interaction between graphene and the lunar surface in view of the future environments that are going to be built on the moon. So literally, the space is the limit, or maybe it's not the limit for graphene-related materials, so stay tuned and exciting things to come.
Thank you. And Vladimir?
I looked into the audience and I see many young people, and two-dimensional materials and graphene is for you because it has a lot to do in the future, and many interesting stories will come out maybe from your work, But if you want to learn more about it, come to Manchester, and come to Manchester next year in June, because there will be Graphene 2023 conference at the end of June in Manchester.
Thank you to our UK panel. I'd like to thank Chris Barton once again, and thank you everyone for listening and paying such great attention to our panelists.